A very good morning to you on this 26th day of November. We are live, and if you've reached us on this channel, you've reached the fifth connection, a channel on which we are given to talking you through the storyline of the scriptures. And this morning we are in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 22. Isn't it strange and amazing how out of kilter we live as the people of God? There is disorder in the household. Think of a courtroom where the judge has to calm and quiet those who are becoming raucous and out of order, and he says, order in the court. Well, that's God's design for the assembly this morning. He's calling the house to order. And Ephesians chapter 5, starting in verse number 22, Paul the writer is going to talk through issues pertaining to household order. These texts in the Pauline literature are called the Houstophelen texts. That's not Hebrew for household, that is German for household order. Houstophelen, the ordered household. And these texts are about families and how families are to operate. There are a number of texts like that scattered throughout the Petrine literature, the Pauline literature, and there are blocks of texts that are given to how the household is to function. And we're going to start up in verse number 22. But let's put this verse in its habitat. Let's show where this verse and this text lives. Because people get bent out of shape very, very quickly. When you talk about order in the house, order in the court, they get bent out of shape. Wives get bent out of shape. Husbands do. So do children, and so do parents. And so what Paul does is Paul shows us where these instructions live. And he starts out in chapter 4, verse number 1, saying that, listen, you and I need to walk worthy. We need to walk according to the highest values of what is self-evident in life. Axios is the word from which we get the English word axiomatic. Axiomatic truths are truths that are self-evident. You can't prove them, but they are really real. They are self-evident. What the Constitution in the US calls inalienable human rights. Inalienable rights. They are self-evident rights. You can't prove them in a test tube, but they are what is really real. And so Paul says in chapter 4, verse 1, walk worthy. He scarcely starts out talking about walking worthily. Then he goes on to walk in love. Walk with high affordance of choice. He scarcely gets out of there, and then he says, walk in love. Walk as those who are awakened, those who are alive from the dead. Yes, you heard me. Alive from the dead. He says, wake up as those alive from the dead, and Christ will give you light in chapter 5. Now in verse number 15, all the way to verse number 20, he's going to speak generally now about how we need to walk in wisdom, and then he's going to go into specific relationships and show us what wisdom really looks like on the ground. Walk as, not as unwise, but as wise. Don't walk foolishly. Don't walk as those void of any sense and sense making. Because you're going to need to be empowered by the Spirit. Be filled with the Spirit in order to pull off wise living in the context of the field of relationality. Now, what's the field of relationality? Well, it's my terminology for household order. It has to do with relationships, the field where relationships are really real. Husband and wife, husband to wife, wife to husband, parents to children, children to parents. This is what is really real. That's why the writer starts out and in verse 21 and he says, listen, in the context of mutual reciprocal submission, aligning with one another, because that's what mutual submission is all about. Align yourself with one another and to one another. When there's a military parade and the military participants are called to stand at ease, they have a particular posture. And then when they are to stand at attention, they have another posture. But before they posture, they position themselves at least an arm length one from another. And they will be shuffling until they are properly aligned to be called to attention, to be called to order. Well, this is what the writer is doing from verse 1 of chapter 4 already. Because you see, men, women, and children, you need to learn to come into an alignment with God and then with one another. When you are at ease, you are relaxed and you are one arm's length away from the person next to you. But when you are called to attention, then you do what he says do. And now the order to the wives. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. Notice the 10-letter word is submission. But it comes out from verse number 21. But it comes out from verse number 1 already of chapter 4. Because in order to navigate the field of relationality, you need certain skill. The skill of alignment. Your wheels need to be aligned. Ever driven a vehicle that swerves slightly? One wheel is out of alignment and that car will veer very, very slightly to the left or to the right. When you are out of alignment, wives, the vehicle of your marriage will swerve and swerves toward the pavement, which is very risky. The emphasis here is on submitting to your own husbands, not someone else's husband, your own. As to the Lord, there's the template. There's the pattern. As to the Lord. It's only as you understand what it means to arrange yourself under God's authority and God's rule for your life that you understand mutual submission and then specific submission within the context of household order. Let's just slow down quite a bit. Wives, come under your own husbands because there is protection there. And the writer is going to show where that protection comes from and what it looks like in the very next verse, verse 23, and the very next verse, verse 24, and the very next verse, and the very next, and the very next. So don't get nervous and don't overreact. Don't allow a knee-jerk reaction. Allow yourself to proact in light of God's design for the field of relationality. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14 to 16, Paul says, my goal is to come to you quickly, but if I don't, I want to give you instructions about how you need to behave in the household of God. And in God's household, there is order. This word household is the word oikos, from which we get the word oikonomia. Oikonomia is at the base of our English understanding of our word economy. It's God's economy. And God has arranged his world according to a wisdom order. That's why the planets don't swing out of their orbit. That's why Earth revolves around its own axis. It rotates on its own axis, rather, and revolves around the sun at the same time. Wow. Two things that are absolutely huge, one and the same time. Rotation gives day and night, and revolution gives seasons. Isn't that something? Day and night springs from rotation, and seasons and signs spring from revolution around the sun. So you need to understand that God's order is there for a reason. And if you think these instructions are luxuries, well, you're going to feel the bite of the nail in the relationships that you face. Because if you think it takes pneumatic power, the filling of the Spirit to submit, think of the function of the husband. He is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. That's the template. You see, when I put myself next to another husband, I look pretty good. You may put yourself as a wife next to another wife, and you may look pretty good in your submission pattern. But when you put yourself next to Jesus, well, that changes things quite a bit. Because he's the one who perfectly submitted to the will of God in all its fullness and with all of what that meant. That meant the agony of Gethsemane, the shame of Gabbatha, and the utter ruin and loss of life at Golgotha. It's Gabbatha, it's Gethsemane to Gabbatha to Golgotha. Gethsemane is the garden, Gabbatha is the pavement where judgment is executed on him, and Golgotha is where he dies. That is what submission looks like in terms of Calvary. And ladies, here's your Calvary road. You may say, yeah, gee, thanks. Thank you, Lord. Well, it's no lighter and more mild for the husband, nor for the boss, nor for the kids, nor for the parents. So these are tough ones, but they are executed in the power of the Pneuma. He is the influencer. He is the Spirit. Because wise living is going to cost you something. And it's going to cost you nothing short of Holy Spirit enabling. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, as to the appointed one. And so if you think submission is tough, think of what headship looks like. And we'll come to the husbands, but let's park here. Because you are going to go into your life today as a wife, and opportunities are going to come up that you are going to be afforded to align yourself according to God's order for the household. And how are you going to posture? You can take a vehicle for wheel alignment, and they put lead weights on the wheel, on the rim of the tire, on the rim of the wheel rather, to balance it, and then they put the tire back. Maybe your alignment is out this morning because you really choke on this one. And you do not see the checks and the balances that God has placed into what wise living looks like and the template he's given. Wives arranging themselves, aligning themselves to their husbands. And this may require that you have some very interesting, hard convos, good faith convos with your spouse about what that alignment for you looks like and what it feels like and the challenge that it brings. But it's all part of developing. It's all part of living in this field of reality. Welcome to the real world. God has the menu set, and you've placed your order because you said, I do. And now the meals are being dished out. What are you going to do? Are you going to eat your meal, or are you going to moan and grouse and groan over what the menu has? You will have opportunity today in that sphere if you are a married woman to learn what alignment looks like in God's household. Take the opportunity. Don't run away from it. Take it, because it's there for your protection. These are the values. It's called a hierarchy of values. All of us have them. And at different times, our hierarchy switches and shifts and changes. But you're going to face it. If you're married and you want to have a marriage that really moves in the flow of reality, then you're going to have the good faith convos. How about taking up that challenge today to face what's really real? And first of all, to talk through it. So we're barely scraping the surface on what order in the house looks like in terms of the marriage. But you can posture for the next challenging episode as we continue in our talks on household order. God bless you as you go in your walk with Him this day. Goodbye for now.